Welcome to the Mindful CIO podcast, where we explore the human side of tech leadership and what it takes to mindfully and sustainably lead high-performing tech teams. Welcome to episode 3 of the Mindful CIO podcast with Henrik Mitsch, VP Digital at Elli, a brand of the Volkswagen Group. In this episode, we are excited to welcome Henrik, our very first international guest, joining us directly from Germany. Henrik shares his journey of shifting from a career-driven mindset to one centered around purpose and impact. He provides an insightful look into the massive transformation taking place in the automotive industry, especially with Elli's pioneering efforts in electric vehicle manufacturing and energy trading in Europe. We dive into Henrik's approach to leadership, emphasizing the importance of focus, presence, and mindfulness in navigating today's fast-paced, high-pressure work environment. He also reflects on his Tai Chi journey, the principles of the Mindful CIO Manifesto, and how these practices help him stay grounded. To wrap up, Henrik shares his number one leadership tip for tech leaders, which is ask yourself often, what do you need to be widely successful? This episode is packed with valuable and practical insights from purpose-driven leadership to sustainability in the tech world. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so we're back. So welcome back to the Mindful CIO podcast, where we explore the human side of tech leadership. Today, our guest is Henrik Mitsch, who is an accomplished IT leader and digital product expert, currently the Vice President of Digital at Elli Volkswagen Group Charging. With a track record of transforming digital products and organizational structures, Henrik has held key roles at Sono Motors, Mozilla, and 60, blending technical depth with strategic oversight. Passionate about systems thinking, inclusion, and new work, Henrik is committed to leveraging technology to solve complex business challenges. So welcome, Henrik. Such a pleasure to have you here. So thanks for accepting the invitation to have a conversation today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. It might be good to kind of the audience know I met Henrik over a decade ago. It's been a long time since we met, back in the days when we were both working for a consulting firm. And we met in this little town close to Chicago, a few hours from Chicago, during our training as newly promoted managers, I think, for you as well, Henrik, back then.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, so over 10 years. And here we are having a conversation after over a decade.
True.
So, Henrik, I'd like to, of course, I read, a short version of your bio, but I'd love to hear from you. What is one aspect of your career journey or of you personally that you'd like to share with the listeners, something that is maybe not in your LinkedIn profile?
Well, I think maybe something that's between the lines in my LinkedIn profile is my journey from being a very career-centered person towards becoming more of a purpose-oriented person. And as you mentioned, right back more than 10 years ago when we were both on this new manager training, I think both of us were fairly career-focused people. That was also, I guess that's one of the main reasons why you would go to a big consulting company in early on in your career. And it was really in these last 2-3 stops in my professional life that I was able to, I wouldn't say put one over the other, but more like add this purpose aspect to it. And I'm able to, and I would probably say I'm in this privileged position to be able to do something meaningful and purposeful while at the same time being in a role that allows me to make the impact I'd like to make.
Beautiful. Thanks, Henrik. Yes, purpose. Let's definitely explore that topic throughout our conversation today. One thing that I realized that I haven't mentioned, kind of relevant to the listeners to know that you're based in Munich in Germany. So you are officially our very first international guest speaker in the Mindful CIO podcast, Henrik.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm a big fan. I think most of your previous guests were probably Australia based. I'm based here in Munich, Germany. We have almost, I think, 10 or 12 hours time difference. It's huge. It's the late afternoon for you. It's the early morning for me. But it's amazing. I do have a few friends down under, so I'm excited to be able to connect and reconnect.
Thank you. So I think it would be good to give the listeners a little bit of a brief overview of, your role at Elli and what Elli is all about, because here in Australia, some people might not be familiar, and you are, a trailblazer in this space, merging automotive, energy, manufacturing. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what Elli is actually, pioneering right now.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, you're spot on. Elli is a brand of the Volkswagen Group, and we are very, very Europe focused. And what we do is our legal name is Volkswagen Group Charging. So we are the part of Volkswagen that makes sure you can charge electric vehicles, you can build up electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and we also trade energy at the European Energy Stock Exchange. And this is a huge transformation that we are in the automotive industry, where it blends inside the car. Cars are becoming more and more digital. The screens and what's happening with the in-car and entertainment is becoming more and more important, more of a buyer decision. But also outside, when you look at this kind of change from a combustion engine to an electric engine, you are changing the whole ecosystem, because all of a sudden you drive around these huge batteries, and over time we will see more and more bi-directional charging capabilities, where cars can not only take in energy but also discharge energy into the home or into the grid. And that's where things become, from a technology perspective, super exciting, but also from a business model and an environmental perspective, very, very interesting, because all of a sudden you can build autonomous energy systems, because basically you have a small power plant or a virtual power plant if you combine these vehicles, and you can eventually drive at a very, very low cost, because the energy you charge can be traded against energy you might be discharging, or you can be charged when there's a lot of sustainable energy available in the grid. And so you can basically use the battery not only to drive your car, but also basically bridging supply and demand time differences. And therefore it's a whole new world of looking at mobility and sustainability at the same time.
Fantastic. It must be very exciting to be, leading cutting edge or bleeding edge, as you mentioned in the podcast that I listened to you recently, initiatives like these. And with your passion for sustainability, Henrik, having a young son, and you're talking about purpose before. So how does it feel to be working in that field where you know that it can have an impact, and a positive impact too? To this area, and the impact for future generations as well?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the imperative of our time, right? Again, most of us have to work because we need to feed our families and kind of, make sure we do something meaningful with our lives. But if you are in a position to choose where you work, and this is where I'm fortunately in, and then I definitely want to choose something that is good for the planet, because there is no planet B, as our CEO likes to say, and we need to address the bigger issues of climate change, of our climate urgency, and mobility is a big part of this, right? I mean, people need cars and transportation, buses or even commercial transportation vehicles to make our life happen. And at the moment, this takes a huge strain on our environment. And with electric mobility, there is the opportunity to at least make the way we move, make it carbon free, and therefore bring a huge part to this change we need to make happen over the next years and decades to keep this this planet habitable and as beautiful as it is.
Fantastic. So I think we can come back to this topic and explore more, especially the bi-directional charging. That's something that I was surprised and curious to learn more, but maybe we can circle back to that topic later. So I'm curious, Henrik, in terms of, we were talking earlier about the Mindful Sale Manifesto, and although you are, in Europe, you're kind of following us on LinkedIn and the progression from 1.0 to Manifesto 2.0. So if I asked you, what are the aspects or what resonates the most with you out of the Mindful Sale Manifesto? Well,
first of all, I really loved when you brought up this initiative a few years back. I think it's definitely, it's you're hitting the right tone there. As IT leaders, we do have a lot of impact. Yes, it's all computers, but we know very well that it's IT is a human business, right? It's all about the people who make those computers work. And even in times of Gen AI and so on, it's first and foremost about people. And I think it's so important that we develop a firm understanding of how do we make these people and the technology work. We are usually in very, very stressful environments, right? There's always time and budget and feature pressure, and it's it's always further, faster, cheaper, and it's stressful. And I like your Mindful CIO manifesto in that aspect, because it kind of helps me center on what are these pillars that I want to base my day-to-day work on. And one of the one of the points that most resonates with me is in the 2.0 version of the manifesto, this point around presence, focus and presence. I mean, today before we started our interview, I turned off some of the applications that would usually send me notifications all the time, Slack, email, Teams, all that jazz. And I think focus and presence are so important to get things done, to go from being distracted to being impactful.
Beautiful. Thanks, Henrik. Yeah, what comes to mind is this mantra from Rasmus Hogard, someone that I worked with in the past from Potential Project. He talks about speed up by slowing down, how slowing down, how important it is. That makes me think of Tai Chi, and which leads to the next question that I had for you. So how do you, keep yourself sane, leading over 100 people, leading such complex, initiatives? What do you do to keep yourself, well, mentally, physically, emotionally, Henrik? Is there any, strategies, any rituals, anything that you do on a regular basis to help you to be in good shape overall?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I guess good shape, as you say, overall, there's lots of aspects that I'm not as good at as than I should be. Our son, 10-year-old son, he's a I would say a professional ice hockey player, and I'm just amazed at all the things he can do on skates. So, definitely on the sports side, something I'll have the opportunity to improve a lot. He's now coaching me, but on the mental side, as you also mentioned, the thing that I discovered over the years is the mindfulness practice, if you will, is Tai Chi. I've been practicing Tai Chi for over 20 years. I discovered it during my student exchange here in Spain. It was an opportunity to be someone different and to discover new things. And I said, I want to try this Tai Chi thing. And that was 1999. It's been a while. And then since then, I've been doing Tai Chi on and off in different continents, different countries across Europe. And during our consulting time, I was sometimes on kind of longer lasting projects. I would find a Tai Chi practitioner and practice. So that's definitely my thing, right? And right now, my Tai Chi teacher is an almost 80-year-old woman. She's just amazing. I learned so much from her. It's on a mental, spiritual, physical base. It's great. to practice Tai Chi with her and to be, mention, okay, don't do it this way, do it that way. It's just amazing. I love it.
Wonderful. Wow. 20 years long practice of Tai Chi. That's commitment. And I can imagine how much wisdom with that teacher. Would be someone very interesting to connect and to learn from. Absolutely. Talking about teachers, Henrik, we spoke earlier and you mentioned, I think it was Professor Francis Frei,
right,
as a bit of a reference in terms of leadership or, thought leadership at least. So do you have any previous leaders or people that you worked with that you really admire, perhaps because of some of their traits, personally or professionally, anyone that you look up and you kind of, use as a reference for inspiration for your leadership style and you as a professional and as a father as well, perhaps? Because leadership, as a parent, you're a leader as well in a different way.
A leader and a follower as well. I mean, so much to learn from our kids. And so also a few years back, I had the opportunity to attend a program at MIT Sloan School, and that was really an amazing experience over the course of 3 years. I spent several weeks in Boston on campus, and it's a transformational experience. Some of these professors are, of course, all of them are experts in their fields, but the way they teach, as I said, I studied in Austria and in Spain, but this was a different experience, and so few of the people who stuck with me from that time are Professor Sterman, for example, who is big in systems thinking and business dynamics, does a lot of work on climate change these days. He opened or introduced me to a world of seeing business problems very, very different, trying to understand how things are connected and understand this system thinking can be applied everywhere. Climate change for sure, but also to business problems, organizational change, literally everywhere. And that was really, I'm very grateful having had the opportunity to spend time in his class. And then a person who I've not personally met, but I had also had a podcast session with, or some kind of voice conversations with, but is Professor Francis Frei from Harvard Business School. And her work on trust is outstanding. So, it helps me a lot to kind of use her trust triangle frame of reference. She says there's three components to building and maintaining trust. It's logic, authenticity, and empathy. Any of her books or podcasts around this, or talks, TED Talks, are really highly recommend them. It's amazing work. And during the pandemic, she was just going onto social media platforms and did her classes in a kind of an open access way, and it was amazing to study with her and probably thousands others, and have these Harvard business class case study review discussions. A very, very, very fun and easy to learn way of understanding new things. Very cool.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, when you mentioned, I was like, Francis Frei, and I Google her. It's like, I remember of that TED Talk, but it was a good reminder. So I'll look it up. I haven't actually read or checked her book, so I'll check her out. Thanks for sharing, Henrik. So you mentioned resilience, and in some of previous conversations, you mentioned adversity, and of course in the tech space, here in Australia, it's been tough. We have lots of organizations restructuring and lays off. I think that's happening everywhere. And of course, with artificial intelligence and the economy, so many challenges that we are facing. Let alone pandemic, post-pandemic kind of phase, etc. So I remember in one of the conversations before that I listened, previous podcasts where you were interviewed, you mentioned these 5 minutes, how did you call the learning?
Learning, yeah, 5 minutes of learning in my team meetings, yes.
Yeah, in your staff meeting. So I thought that was really, really interesting, and to, make use of 5 minutes in your regular meetings with your team to introduce some human skills or aka soft skills. You mentioned the nonviolent communication, which I was like, wow, that's really, I guess novel for many tech leaders to be talking about NVC and your learnings, your frameworks around feedback and the delegation polka that I looked up as well. I was like, oh, this is fascinating because I have all the frameworks in mind for delegation, but I definitely will be leveraging that one, Henrik, moving forward. So I'm curious how that idea came up and how did you start on this habit and how your team is actually receiving, because I can see, similar to the Mindful Sale Manifesto, the need to develop soft skills, either not only from leaders, but from, individual contributors as well. And I imagine that you're having a lot of return, it's an investment of your time, but it's very rewarding, I imagine, for you to help your team to developing those more human or soft skills.
Yeah, so this is something that I do here in my staff meeting. As you mentioned, my organization is a little more than 100 people. And I thought to myself, okay, on the one hand, when I joined this organization almost 2 years ago, the area that I'm responsible for was mostly staffed with contractors, and we decreased the overall size a little bit, and then we completely flipped the workforce, going from 80% externals to 90% internals. So a lot of people, over the course of a year and a half, a lot of people left and a lot of people joined. And it was really the opportunity to build a new department and shape our culture, right? And so I thought, how can I go about this? And the idea that I had, that I followed through with, was I do my staff meeting every 3 weeks for 35 minutes. I feel like, doing it once a month is not enough. Doing it fortnightly, too much. Spending a full hour is too much. Half an hour is usually too little. So I deliberately take 35 minutes, hoping that if I run over a minute or two, people don't have back-to-back meetings. And I provide general updates, give some highlights about some of the achievements we made or some of the big learnings we had. And then I want to open a space. I call these 5-minute learning segments, where it's basically, sometimes I refer to it as the Henrik mini MBA, where I introduce concepts. Just last week we spoke about the business model canvas, but also about lots of more how we work with each other, nonviolent communication, spotting and pointing out and handling bias. We are a very, very international team. Something that might be cool for one person might be offending to another. Levels of listening, decision methods, as you said, delegation poker. So, and then for many of us, English is not our first language, right? So also helping understand how we handle this, what do we do if there are two people at the water cooler having a conversation maybe in German, and the third person joins who does not speak German, or the other way around? And there's like lots of topics that I am trying to bring into our team, and providing them with approaches or tools on making sure we get along as best as we can.
Beautiful. Amazing. Thanks for sharing, Henrik. And I remember, the mention about the purple flag news. I only heard about purple flag not long ago, and then heard you mentioning that as well. The use of the purple flag, even highlighting. Well, what I'm about to say, it could be a purple flag, but I'm gonna say anyway because it's a really good tool, I think, so people can still express their thoughts, but be able to give a heads up if that could potentially be misinterpreted or received in a not optimal way by others. Well done. Wow. So many areas that I want to investigate, but let's talk about, as you know, the focus here in the Mindful Sale podcast, Henrik, it's the non-technical side of, tech leadership. So often with clients, some areas that are hot topics around leading change, managing competing priority, mention, demands around different features for you, I think, developing talent, retaining talent as well. Another area that we discussed with the last guest in the last episode was around engaging the board, getting buy-in, getting funds approved. So all of the non-technical related issues. So Of course, I guess in your area, leading change and innovating, it's maybe one particular topic that I imagine you have some stories or a particular perspective. But what would you like to share with the listeners in terms of the human side of tech leadership, or the other areas that might be relevant for us to explore?
Well, I think leading change, both organizational change or big product development initiatives or innovation initiatives, I think one of the most important parts for me that we bring in there as humans is our ability to collaborate on a shared understanding of what's going on here. So I'm struggling, but I want to use the term truth. Truth is a difficult term because it's a big concept. What is true? And that is where one thing that I repeatedly bring into conversations is to say, okay, look, let's find some agreement now. And it doesn't matter if this is the truth. We need to have an agreement to collaborate and to move to the next stage. This might be the next product increment. It might be the next iteration. It might be the next board meeting. So we agree on this next step, because I deeply, deeply believe that agreeing and getting to the next step will create a conscious or a state of consciousness in us that allows us to then go to the next step and the following and so on, right? And so instead of saying, this is the truth, this is where I need to go, let's figure out small spaces of agreement where we can collaborate to then further learn, understand, adapt potentially, and continue. I think that is the biggest, often a big impediment towards collaboration, that people might get, myself included, get too stubborn, get too stuck on a big idea, and we are unable to take smaller steps towards it. And so I remind myself and I remind the people around me to say, okay, look, let's take small steps, and it will be good in the end. I'm deeply convinced of this.
Excellent. So looking for common ground, baby steps. Where do we agree? Let's focus on the areas that we agree and take that baby step, and then we reassess once we get there.
Exactly.
Great tip. Very practical, Henrik. Thank you. So we spoke about purpose before, and now that you mentioned the word truth, I couldn't help to think about purpose, spirituality, science. A friend of mine says that silence is the new religion. So what else in the area of purpose, if anything, would you like to perhaps dig a little bit further, share any thoughts? I know a little bit about your journey, in the area of purpose and perhaps spirituality, if I may say. So is there anything else that, comes to mind that you'd like to share with the listeners that you think will be relevant?
Thank you very much. Well, I think, as Simon Sinek says, start with why, right? So it's important to understand the purpose behind something, the purpose, maybe also driving the person opposite you, or even if you are in a group or in a team, a purpose can be found everywhere. You should find it for yourself, but you can find it in all these artifacts at work, right? And I think it's so important to be clear on purpose, to have a clear understanding about this for yourself, and bring that clarity into wherever you go. And I think once we know why we do things, we'll figure out that the how and the what are often, there's many ways to reach the same goal, right? But if we are clear on why we do those things, clear to ourselves, clear to the others, if we can be talking about them, can make the other folks we're collaborating with understand why we do things, then it's really it's I would say it's a collaboration superpower.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, I mentioned feedback before and, competing priorities. With feedback, I learned from you that you use the radical candor, framework as a reference from Kim Scott, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Yes. So would you like to expand a little bit more? Why do you think that's a good framework? And for those who are not familiar with, maybe give a 1 minute learning segment from Henrik on radical candor for feedback, which I think is such a hot topic because most people would agree that giving feedback is hard, receiving feedback can be hard. Even, very senior. The other day we did the Mindful Sale community at the launch actually of the Mindful Sale podcast, and feedback was the theme of the discussion that I selected. And school find hard and to receive and give feedback, many hands went up. So regardless of the seniority, I think, some people still struggle to find the right balance, not too soft, not too harsh, how to deliver. So any thoughts or any practical tips, Henrik, about giving and receiving feedback as well?
Well, I totally agree with everything you said. Giving and receiving feedback is hard. It's very hard. I think it goes deep down into our souls, right? And you could probably take psychotherapy sessions around this, but kind of bring this to a more practical context. I have found a lot of use in Kim Scott's work and her books, Radical Candor and Just Work was the second book. And so the way she's kind of she comes across, to me at least, as very, very having a very easy time delivering feedback. But I think she went through a huge learning journey there as well. And basically she says, it's about caring for people and challenging people, challenging their assumptions, challenging their behavior. And if you deeply care, if probably a word that's not so common in business, but I like to use that. If you love the person in front of you, love, it doesn't have to be a love relationship, but it's about love, respect, empathy for the other person, right? If you love that person, then you can deliver them tough truths, right? It's this loving guidance that you give as a leader, as a parent. And you can bring these things to the workplace, right? And that's radical candor. And it's not easy, but I also think the alternative is worse. I mean, if you do something wrong to me or to someone else or to yourself, and I don't point this out to you, that's not great of me or anyone around you. And if I don't really care about you, then I should better not give you any feedback. So I for me, it helps me a lot to think about this. Okay, how do I deliver my love, my appreciation, my respect, and tell these people what I believe they can learn, what I believe they might not have seen, what I have perceived, how I have felt when they said or did this and that thing. And so I think that is for me a very, very helpful approach to delivering feedback. And I'm probably still failing, I don't know, 6 out of 10 times, but I'm much better now than I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Super. Thanks, Henrik. Thanks for sharing. Yes, I agree. What I captured here in my notes was high nurture and high expectation. So there's a TED Talk that I listened, I think was Matt Beaton, the guy, Bring Your Whole Self to Work, that he was talking about the high-performing workplaces. Often there are high expectations in terms of achievement, but also high nurturing. So that's, exactly what I think you describe it in other words.
Absolutely. And I think that's what you and I both also experience back in our consulting days, right? Those are these accelerated environments, right? You super high expectations, super tense, but at the same time, if you take the right train, you can become very, very successful and grow very, very quickly, as I would say both of us did. That's why we met at the manager training so many years ago.
Yes, 100%. Henrik, I feel like I still want to pick your brain. I'm conscious of time. So with the delegation poker, I was fascinated because I haven't come across that before. And whenever I think of delegation, one model that comes to mind, I don't know if you're familiar with, is the situational leadership. Yeah. So depending on the level of skill and will of the person that I'm delegating, I can choose to be very directive. So low support, high direction, or coaching or supporting, which is now a little bit more autonomy and support, or I delegate when someone has high skill, high will. I don't need to provide direction. I don't need to provide very little direction, very little support, because they are capable and motivated enough to go and do it. So when I came across the delegation poker, I thought, oh, that's nice because they're a little bit more granular. And yeah, so would you mind sharing how did you come across? And for those who are not familiar with delegation poker, because I thought that was so, practical a tool, so a very practical tool to help people to think about how they want to delegate and to communicate that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so, the way I apply delegation poker, you have usually, we know about the two extremes and the middle point of delegation. So the two extremes would be, I tell you what to do, and then there's not much discussion around it. Like with a small child on the street, if there's a red light, you stop, full tell, no discussion. The other one is a complete delegation. So we do it entirely the way you want to do this, and I'll not ask, I'll not do anything. It's like saying to my son, here you have a €5 note and buy the comic that you want, right? Full delegation, he'll do, and I'll not interfere. And then in between, kind of easy one as well, is the agreement, right? Where we are equal partners. We have a 50-50 share and we agree. Like going out for dinner, do we go for Bavarian cuisine or sushi or Italian? We agree on something and we do it. But the interesting space is in the gaps between those two extremes. And this is where, for me, the delegation poker concept helps me so much. First of all, it helps me understand, where am I coming from? Am I trying to sell you something? Do I want to consult you, but I still want to be the decision taker? Or am I giving you advice? Or do I just want to inquire kind of how are things going? I'm totally fine that you do what you do, but I want to be kind of informed, right? And so this is super important. And for me personally, sometimes I struggle in making clear where I am or where I want to be in a conversation. And I literally use the cards and show them up in the screen as I look. I'm trying to sell you something now. It might sound like a question, but actually I might be poorly delivering it. That's why I say it's a sell. You can like it or not like it, but we will do it this way. Or sometimes I say this will sound like a statement, but it is a question. I'm inquiring here with you. What's happening, and so it helps me give a language to my, let's say, levels of autonomy and delegation, and also helps the people who work with me say, okay, well, are you consulting me? Do you want to agree? What's your mode of operation here? And so it helps us, again, be better together.
Brilliant. I can imagine how that can help you to be more transparent and even label and even ask yourself, and am I trying to sell to get their buy-in, or I'm actually just consulting them, but I'm the final decision maker, as you said, and you have that common language in the team and real good clarity. Wonderful. So I think your team is very lucky, Henrik. Very lucky to have you.
I'm not the one to judge. We shall see, right?
So yeah, I'm getting conscious of time, but I can help. I have one more question, if I may, before we do the final one around priorities. I'm sure you have, with the complexity of your landscape, the ecosystem, what are you doing? I imagine that your backlog, is no joke. There are probably, way more features and things that you need to achieve within your timeline that it's actually possible, or with the resource of the team you have. So how do you manage competing priorities? What are your, key top tip strategies, or what helps you to keep focus on what's important and to negotiate with stakeholders, or how do you deal with competing demands?
Yeah, definitely something we deal with daily, right? And I guess the way my head of product and I solve or address this in our current setup is by making these conflicting demands visible to all involved stakeholders. So we have regular meetings with our board and certain sales unit leaders, where we show what we're doing and which decisions have led to which, let's say, prioritization outcomes. And we can consult then, right? And we hear different opinions. We make clear if we do this, we have to stop or slow down doing that, and basically we also try to elevate everyone's individual need into a need for the company, right? To think of company outcomes instead of individual sales or business unit outcomes, right? And so I think that is super important, right? You, from systems thinking, you, or how do you say, awareness-based systems change, you make the system see itself. That's what we're trying to do, and I'm very fortunate to work with a head of product who is able to visualize and lead the conversation in a way that we usually have tough conversations, but very respectful, and we achieve once again enough shared agreements to go to the next step and then take it from there.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing, Henrik. Well, we better start to wrap up, and I'll let you start your day, right? Because it's 10 a.m. for you in Munich. So maybe last question, Henrik. If you were to pick maybe 1 to max 3 tips if you had to advise tech leaders to sustainably and mindfully leading their high-performing teams, what are the top tips that comes to mind? How to mindfully and sustainably lead high-performing teams? We spoke about a number of things, but if you had to, pick 1, 2, or 3, what would you say?
Well, I believe that empowering the edges is the most important thing. We as leaders are not domain experts, are not technical experts. We have experience, we might have some wisdom, but fortunately we will work with people who are much, much deeper into the topics, into the technology, into the projects. And we need to give them the space to let great solutions emerge. And one question I learned from Professor Frances Frei and her wife was, what do you need to be wildly successful? So I try to ask this question as often as I can. What do you need to be wildly successful? And whatever the answer is, that's my job. My job is to make them wildly successful.
Fantastic. I think this is the perfect point for us to wrap up, Henrik, with those wise words, paraphrased from Frances Frei. So thanks so much for sharing. It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like we need to do part 2 in some stage. But for now,
I'm happy to do so. Yes, would love it.
Now, I'm very, very grateful for your time. Thanks so much for joining us, and wish you all the best with your projects at Elli.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Henrik.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in and joining our discussion today. If you're learning from this podcast, please subscribe, give us a good rating, and share it with your friends. If you have any questions or suggestions about guests you'd like me to interview here in the Mindful CIO podcast, please share in the comments below. Last not least, thank you for your interest in the human side of tech leadership. See you in the next episode.